Okay, brilliant.
Free Assange now.
Free Julian Assange now.
La liberté pour Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange now.
الحرية لجوليان أسانج.
Free Assange now.
Free Julian Assange now.
الحرية لجوليان أسانج.
Free Julian Assange now.
Free
الحرية لجوليان أسانج.
الحرية
Julian Assange
لجوليان أسانج.
Free Julian Assange now.
Hi, I'm Daniel O'Brien, and you're joining the Journalist Support Committee's panel on the jailing of Assange, the end of press freedom. Joining me tonight are a fantastic selection of international experts in various fields: journalism, activism, law, and they'll be discussing some of their issues with the Assange case, why it's important to them and why you should care, and what it means for the future of press freedom. Julian Assange is internationally known as the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks attracted worldwide attention in 2011 since publishing documents and footage relating to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, notably the collateral murder video showing the execution of 18 civilians, including 2 Reuters journalists in Iraq. Assange was tried by Sweden and hid in the Ecuadorian embassy as he feared that Sweden might extradite him to the USA. He has been held in Belmarsh prison on charges of skipping bail and is now facing extradition to the United States. His initial hearing was won, with the judge ruling that he should not be extradited to the United States, and the US is now appealing that decision. His case has attracted worldwide attention and support from journalists, anti-war activists, lawyers, judges, trade unions, politicians, and even the UN calling for his release. Joining me tonight is Dr. Deepa Driver, a trade unionist, university lecturer, award-winning journalist, and citizen activist campaigner for Assange's freedom. Thank you for joining us tonight, Deepa.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm not a journalist, but I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask initially, what drew you to Assange's case? Why did you get involved in this?
Well, what WikiLeaks did seemed incredibly powerful and important when it actually happened around the time of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and looking at the kind of information that was coming out of WikiLeaks made you as a citizen feel quite empowered, because here was this big American state stamping down on a lot of different countries, and here was this small organization that was willing to take them on. And so WikiLeaks was quite inspirational early on. As time went on and Julian went into the embassy, people like me wrongly believed that the time in the embassy was not particularly harsh. I was very naive and, in fact, quite silly and stupid, because obviously an embassy is not meant for people, especially a small embassy office like it was at the Ecuadorian embassy, is not meant for somebody to live there for any length of time. And I'm ashamed to admit that I only realized how bad things were when the British Metropolitan Police, quite like thugs, dragged Julian out of the embassy, because I'd heard rumours about him potentially being ejected from the embassy and hadn't quite twigged how serious it was. And quite soon after he was ejected from the embassy, I attended a public meeting organised by the Committee to Defend Julian Assange, which is a grassroots supporters group which has been going for a long time. They were protesting outside the embassy, etc. I went to this meeting thinking the meeting was organised by WikiLeaks, but actually it was a bunch of about 30 to 40 ordinary citizens coming together, nurses, teachers, housewives, all coming together trying to do something about this case and recognising how important it is. And they inspired me to set up a series of events called Free the Truth, where we, in London, organised public meetings where we brought in very important speakers like Professor Neil Smeltzer, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, John Pilger, Craig Murray, all these, Mark Curtis, all these really interesting, brave, courageous people to come and talk about Julian's case and set out what was really going on, because the mainstream narrative that we were hearing from even so-called liberal papers like The Guardian didn't give you a real sense of the horrors that this case involved, and also of what Julian was going through. There was a lot of smearing, and so this was meant to rebalance that, and that's how I got involved. And ever since, I have become quite seriously involved in that. I served as a legal observer in Julian's case. Of course, that is in a separate capacity, and today I'm speaking in a private capacity. But also I began to get more interested in research related to whistleblowing and accountability for states. My own background is in corporate accountability, so I began to pay more attention to state accountability for criminality, which is what this case is entirely about.
Fantastic. And really at the core of that is you recognising that WikiLeaks is performing an important service by exposing the truth, essentially, letting people know what is really going on. Also joining us this evening is Nikki Constantinidou, barrister and solicitor, admitted to practice in the Supreme Courts of Victoria, Australia and the Judicature of Northern Ireland, and also a novelist published in French and soon to be in English. Good evening, Nikki.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us this evening. On the 27th and 28th, the High Court judges will hear the US appeal over the decision to not extradite Assange.
Yes.
What do you think are the possible outcomes of that case?
I think that everything indicates that the case is lost. We've seen from beginning to end, even from over a decade ago, that this whole thing is rigged all the way. So I expect that Julian will fully lose in the High Court, and then we will be looking at the next few steps. But I don't think hope is a good strategy. There's nothing to indicate that there's anything positive that could happen out of this next phase. It's actually the Stratfor plan. Those who have seen the email, the famous email of 2012 from the Stratfor company, said very clearly that it says, I'm just going to quote it. One other point is this: ferreting out his confederates is also key. Find out what other disgruntled rogues inside the tent or outside. Pile on. Move him from country to country to face various charges for the next 25 years, but seize everything he and his family own, to include every person linked to Wiki. That's exactly what's happening. This is the law that is being followed.
So you think they've essentially made their decision already and they're just following it through?
I think it's fairly clear that the decision was made already. We have seen throughout the last few years, the last decade, we have seen various high officials going from government to government seeking his death, especially in the US. Hillary Clinton wanted to have him droned. And I don't have the list of all the names, but he's been called a high-tech terrorist by Biden. Pompeo called WikiLeaks a hostile intelligence. I don't remember the full hostile non-intelligence service. I may be misquoting him, but there have been various highly placed people in office, in the media, in all countries involved in this conspiracy, especially the US, the UK, Australia. There's another two involved in the conspiracy, Sweden and there's one, and Ecuador. So I think that their intentions have been made very clear over the last decade, and nothing seems to indicate that anything will fundamentally change. And Biden said that nothing would fundamentally change. And we see from his time in office so far that nothing is fundamentally changing. And I think that Julian is such an important person for them to annihilate that they're not going to let go. So I have no hope that anything will be different now. We see that the High Court already allowed an expansion of the grounds of appeal for very flimsy reasons. And so I think that we should be looking at preparing for a loss. But what's worse is that what they could be doing is delaying some more. Whilst he's still in prison, whilst he's still gagged, and nobody has been allowed to have access to him. You've got people like Tommy Robinson, who was in Belmarsh, who was allowed to give interviews to journalists, and nobody's allowed to see or speak to Julian. Not even parliamentarian members of parliament are not allowed. The media, in terms of serious media. And I'm not including mainstream media in that assessment. So he's, as long as he's being gagged and in solitary confinement, effectively, they're happy with that situation. That's exactly what they want. They want him to be silent.
So he has a lot of powerful enemies. Some of the most powerful enemies in the world. The US President Joe Biden called him a terrorist when he was vice president. But do you think public support is changing for Julian Assange? Do you think his support is growing? After the US withdrawal from Afghanistan recently, a video from 2011 in which Assange said that the goal of the war was essentially to wash money from tax bases in the US and Europe, and through the Afghanistan war essentially transfer it to multinational corporations. That tweet got over 3 million retweets. Do you think public support, public opinion is on the side of Assange?
Well, the US government has spent about $2.5 trillion on the Afghan war, for example. Of this, about $1 trillion went on the kind of defense strategies that they had. Another $500 billion, I believe, went on interest payments. And where is the money ending up? It's ending up in the pockets of weapons manufacturers, PR companies, propagandists. And as ordinary people who are living through more than a decade of austerity, where we're being told, the next £20 that the poorest among us get in order to keep them afloat, or the money that you give in order to pay for children to be able to go have a free school meal is not available. Yet billions and billions, whether in terms of the Pentagon budget or in terms of the UK defence budget, are being spent on weapons that actually, there's this wonderful cartoon of somebody saying, okay, we get lots of money, billions and trillions, to drone people who are living on less than $2 a day. And that's exactly what's happening in Afghanistan. A vast majority, 90% of people in Afghanistan live on less than $2 a day. And that a wealthy, rich country, the 5th richest country in the world in the case of the UK, is unable to feed its own people, is droning and killing people who are on less than $2 a day, and destroying nations, whether it's Libya, whether it's Syria, whether it is Yemen, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Iraq, suggests that this is not in the public interest. And what WikiLeaks did was public interest journalism in its most important sense, in rebalancing the power. And Julian once said that it's about rebalancing the power so that there is privacy for the individual and transparency for the state. And so WikiLeaks was allowing ordinary citizens to surveil the state. Now, we know whether in Australia, whether here, whether in other parts of the world, states are getting, especially with COVID, getting more and more intrusive about surveillance. I think it can go one of two ways, and I'm not as, I would say, pessimistic as to say that there is no public support. And I would certainly say that in the last few years, people have begun to see through some of the nonsense that the state has put out. But also people are so bogged down by how difficult life is for ordinary people that it's difficult for them to get beyond their personal circumstances and see this case as something to coalesce around. And that's where we need activists to bring people, to make them realize that this, if you care about the climate, if you care about deaths in Iraq, if you care about refugees, if you care about your own schools, if you care about corruption in your country, then WikiLeaks is the most important, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange's case is the most important case for you too. And that's because WikiLeaks revealed corruption in various parts of the world, including, helping in the Tunisian revolution, in allowing people to understand what was really going on, whether in Kenya, in corruption in terms of Daniel Arap Moi's corruption, whether in terms of Trafigura leaks, where they showed toxic waste dumping off the Ivory Coast. And with COP26 coming up, people will be very interested to look at climate issues. They also showed evidence of serious war crimes, rape, murder, torture of women and children in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it is important that people start coalescing. I think that the battle's changed. We're now in a position of strength. Many of the main, what I call the controlled opposition, the main human rights organizations are all behind Assange. Most of the main newspapers have come out saying, oh yes, Assange should not be prosecuted. This is journalism and journalism is not a crime. And lots of ordinary people in various parts of the world, I hear every day of people in different parts of the world having various protests. And I think if we can bring this all together to stamp out what's going to happen in October, as Nikki rightly said, the court process has always been stacked against Assange in that processes have been arbitrary. He's not been given due process. He's always been treated in a way which is different from everybody else. Even if you take the European arrest warrant in relation to Sweden, where the arrest warrant was not issued by judicial authorities, was issued by the prosecutor. After the case was upheld by the Supreme Court here in the UK, they changed the law because it was such an obvious failing. But they said, oh, we won't use it retrospectively for Julian. So he's always highlighted the weaknesses of our law, or rather his case has, but he's never actually benefited from the corrections to those weaknesses. And we have to make sure that he comes out of this alive, because nobody knows the long-term effects of psychological torture on your body and in your system. And as doctors for Assange have rightly pointed out, he's in a very fragile state and we need to get him out of this alive. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I think you raised some points about the enormity of the things that WikiLeaks deal with, but also what is involved in prosecuting Assange. Nikki, it was revealed in diplomatic cables that the US paid contractor Mantech over $2 million to handle the documentation just for the prosecution for Assange. He's had his meetings with his lawyers spied on. Even his partner Stella Morris, they've been going through her bins trying to find her children's nappies to test DNA. The US and Britain are going to extraordinary lengths to prosecute Assange. Have you seen this in any other case before, any other instance, or is this wholly unprecedented in terms of the prosecution of one individual?
Well, in the free world, it's not so common. Well, it is in a way, but we don't hear much about it. Just like these types of cases go very quietly. Sometimes they're secret trials. In Australia has lots of secret trials, for example, overtly secret trials. In Australia, you've got David McBride, who also revealed war crimes, and he's the one who's being prosecuted, not the criminals. In America, in the US, we've got Daniel Hale, Chelsea Manning, who these two soldiers, actually, they're the only ones who abided by the law. If you look at the military, the US military code, the oath that these soldiers swear, they are under an obligation under domestic law and international law to disobey unlawful orders, even if those unlawful orders come from the president. So actually, not only did they not commit a crime, they did what they had to do in terms of their oath and their duty. They're the only ones who followed the law. Neither of them should have done 1 day in prison. They should never have been prosecuted. The people that should have been prosecuted were pardoned or are still going free and still ruling the world, unfortunately. Biden, instead of being in jail, is the president. Trump was the... there's a whole list of these people who actually should have spent time behind bars. And, that can still happen if they're not pardoned. Although it's unlikely in a system like the US or the coalition of the killing, as people say. So these things are not likely to happen in countries like the US or the UK or Australia, because the system is run by the very people that should be behind bars. So the only thing... Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry. The only thing we can do is really build up public support, and not just support, not something ethereal and theoretical. We need to be organized to fight back, because this advance towards the medieval ages, this obscurantism, where our leaders talk about the Taliban, I'm not so sure that they're so different. They're just more refined in the way that they kill political prisoners or their enemies. So we've gone into an overt war against freedom, but not just against the freedom of certain individuals. This war is a war against us. It's a war against truth, and therefore a war against us. And we see how our lives have been deteriorated. And we see how things are going to get worse unless we get organized and we fight back. And our strongest weapon is a general strike. And for some reason, at the moment, before things get even worse. So we're still at a point where we can get organized, certainly not, unfortunately, not by instances that used to organize people. Once upon a time, we had, a long time ago, stronger trade unions, student unions, etc. Unfortunately, all of that has been diluted. So we need vanguard type of movements or parties that will get people together. For example, in the UK, for me, it's the Workers' Party. If the Workers' Party could send 1,000 people every Saturday outside Belmarsh, believe me, it would be noticed. And it doesn't have to be the same 1,000 people. It could be different 1,000 people every Saturday. Even the BBC won't be able to ignore that. So we need the common man and the common woman to understand that the political is personal, to understand that their lives are being deteriorated and it's going to get worse. We are really going to step over into full fascism. We see all the signs at the moment. And so we have a responsibility, unless we're happy to live in a barbaric state and a barbaric type of life, we have a duty to stand up now before it's too late. So I think that all the signs are there. That Hitler did the same thing. He took over the media. He set up special courts. This is what tyrants always do. They take up the means, the strongest means that could be a barrier between the people and tyrannical powers. They take them over and they gaslight everybody. They make people feel that this is going to go away by itself, or somebody else will take care of it. A trade union or a party or some strong leader. There are no strong leaders. We are the leaders, and we have to get together and stop this now. That's what I think about that part. It is very clear that there have been humongous breaches of every single law I can think of. Every single human right I can think of. They wouldn't even let that
message and call to action, Nikki. Deepa, you're a trade unionist. Do you agree with what Nikki's saying about how we get organised, how we can try and build a movement and actually affect change?
I think as a first step, I'd like to see a lot of people coming outside the High Court on the 27th and 28th of October. That's where the case will be heard, and that's where public presence and public support will be very important. if you're unable to come outside the High Court or you're living somewhere where there are COVID restrictions, etc., then it might be useful to organise a local protest where you are, or even an online gathering, just to increase the potential for things to happen. I think, while I agree with the principle behind what Nikki's saying in terms of us needing to take power and organise ourselves, because the trade union movement is slowly being eaten from within because it's being ruptured by forces of the right, I think it's also important to recognise the realities of people's lives right now. And I think many people are finding it very difficult to live their own lives, leave alone organise. And I think it's incumbent upon us to say that, firstly, to encourage people to come to things like this, but also use this as a forum to allow people to organise in relation to making their own lives better, in addition to Julian's life better, and also in addition to redressing this power balance with the state and tying the two things together.
Fantastic, thank you, Deepa. Nikki, one last question for you. Assange was charged under the Espionage Act 1917. This has historically been used to prosecute socialists, anarchists, other political figures, notably Eugene Debs, who was the presidential candidate for the Socialist Party of America. It's a very controversial law with regards to the American First Amendment, freedom of speech. Is this a criminal trial or a political trial, and what do you make of the implications of the Espionage Act?
Well, the Espionage Act is the kind of law that Hitler would have. You know, don't forget that Hitler's laws were legal too. Slavery was legal. Are these laws, how valid are these laws even under the US Constitution? The US Constitution has certain provisions about the rule of law, the freedom of expression, freedom of the press, but there's no rule of law. This Espionage Act does not allow for the rule of law. It does not allow for due process. You can't have a defense. So where is the justice in all this? There can be no justice. And as far as I'm concerned, and I don't care what the courts have decided there, perhaps it's been decided that it is a proper, valid law. However, even if it is under the US Constitution, again, we the people decide what is legal, moral, and where things should go. And for me, this kind of act is abhorrent. I mean, it's barbaric. It's barbaric, and we cannot even begin to talk about a fair trial in this context where we know what's going to happen. They're going to ship him over there, stick him in a tomb, and not allow him any access to anybody, really. That's the reality. And if you've seen photos or diagrams of the kind of cell that he would be in, it's a tomb. They're going to stick him in a concrete tomb, and he will never be heard of ever again, and we will never know. He will never have a defense. He's not allowed to have a defense. How can we even talk about this being a trial? It's anything. They're burning him at the stake. This is not anything that resembles in any way, shape, or form a modern 21st century type of democracy, the free world, etc. This is something you expect the Taliban to do, right? Not the free world. And I think that, his only crime is what? His crime is he's revealed, we keep forgetting, we talk about, we get lost in details. We forget that what he did very clearly was he revealed war crimes and war criminals. That's what he did. So that can be nothing but political. That, when you attack somebody because of that, then it's political. He did his job, but even if he wasn't a journalist, I don't care personally whether or not he was a journalist or a whistleblower or whoever, or the garbage collector. Anyone who brings proof of war crimes to the world should be protected by the law. That's what I think. But in his case, he is a journalist, so he's got some extra protections because he's a journalist. He's a multi-awarded journalist, let's not forget that, who's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize annually for, I think, 10 years. and he's also a protected journalist on the list of the Council of Europe, the list of protected journalists. So he's recognized by several international and international institutions as being a journalist that should be protected. So I think that we mustn't lose sight of the fact that his crime is that he revealed war crimes, mainly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nikki, for painting such a clear, a vivid, if somewhat depressing picture of reality in Julian's case. We're joined now with Richard Lahui, who is a Dutch-born photographer based in Hamburg, Germany. He focuses on projects taking portraits of people who have faced injustice and oppression and tries to present them in a natural and personal manner. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. Julian Assange has been in the embassy for years and then confined to Belmarsh. This has had an enormous toll on his physical and mental well-being. Is this extreme? Have you seen this kind of oppression or detention of an individual in other instances? And what do you think that says about our legal system and our civilization, essentially?
Well, it's something you don't expect from a civilized Western democracy, I think. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Melzer, has investigated the case, and he has stated that he has never seen a group of democratic states ganging up to deliberately isolate, demonize, and abuse a single individual for such a long time. And this is not something you would expect from a civilized Western democracy. It's just a consistent failure of all involved governments to take measures for the protection of Assange's most fundamental human rights. And states are responsible for the torture of Julian Assange. And under the Convention Against Torture, states must conduct an impartial investigation wherever there is a reasonable ground to believe that an act of torture has been committed. And none of these states has even started an investigation. And although it's required under international law, so it's quite shocking, actually.
Do you believe we will see an investigation into Assange's treatment, or do you think they will simply ignore it?
From what I've heard from Niels Melzer, they will not investigate it. They have just stated in a one-pager that they don't torture people, and that's it. And that's exactly the opposite of Niels Melzer's findings. So he has been tortured, but they do it in such a way that it looks almost harmless. If you all these tortures components, if you look at on their own, but in combination and with this duration of more than 10 years, they have a murderous effect. Right, his life is in danger. So there should be an investigation, but there is not going to be an investigation by the states themselves.
Right, and President of the US, Biden, when he was vice president, called Assange a terrorist. Numerous political and media figures in America have called for Assange's assassination. Do you think he would be safe if he was extradited to the US?
No, not safe at all. He will be held at the Alexandria Detention Center, which is the infamous espionage court. He will have a trial behind closed doors with a jury where the members are drawn from a local population, but 85% of this population work in national security community. So, I mean, the jury is biased. There is significant reason to believe that the judge would sentence him in extremely aggressively. he would have restrictions, which means that he would not be able to view classified documents in the case, so he cannot prepare his own defense. So under international law, it's a situation where it's a case where it's a highly politicized case, and so that's why a fair trial is not possible, and his human rights are basically has no human rights there.
And with your project in photojournalism, where you take portraits of people facing injustice, oppression, what kind of similarities do you see with other people that you've taken portraits of?
Well, the similarity is that all these people fight for justice or to make the world a bit better, and they have the same belief that that it's about the rule of law, it's about democracy, and we cannot afford that a state power remains unsupervised. And so without transparency, there is no accountability. And I think all these people just fight or just want a real democracy instead of what we have now, which is not a real democracy yet.
Assange has said that when they couldn't pick holes in their arguments, they would drive horse and carriages through his character. The mainstream media, the mainstream press, doesn't seem to be picking up or defending the case at all. What do you see coming out of that? Should the mainstream media take more of an interest in this, and why aren't they?
Well, they should, because it's also about them, right? It's not, this case is not about Assange, it's basically about all of us, including the media. The US is trying to criminalize journalism, and so this has an effect on journalists all around the world, and therefore has an effect on, it's a threat to democracy and a threat to the right to know, and the world will be dark, journalism will be dark when Assange is extradited and locked up for life. I mean, there is no journalism or democracy left when this happens.
So, as a journalist, WikiLeaks developed a new kind of model for presenting information. It was displaying primary source factual information on its own with no corporate spin. Do you see this case against Assange as criminalising essentially that type of journalism?
Yeah, sure. Assange and WikiLeaks, they just invented this new model of publishing secret documents that on this scale and in this way that was never done before. Of course, in this case, the US feel enormously threatened by this model, and they just want to make an example of him. Look, if you publish our secrets, then we're going to lock you up. And so if another publisher or journalist gets this idea of publishing these documents, they will think twice now, right? Because if the US gets its way, they can just pick up anyone anywhere in the world and throw them in jail for the rest of their lives without a fair trial. Yeah, that's a real danger.
So, Nikki, thanks for staying with us. Are you concerned about this chilling effect on journalism, on whistleblowing?
Not just journalism, on everything, all of democracy. We've seen how the judicial system is broken down as well.
I'll just come in there to say make a quick point, if that's okay.
Of course.
Well, firstly, you asked a question, a very interesting question, I thought, to Richard about will this ever be tried properly? Will the people who are the criminals ever come to court? And if you look at Northern Ireland, if you look at historic atrocities, whether it's the Nazi atrocities or the atrocities before those, a lot of these cases you would never imagine that they would come to trial when they were going on. And in hindsight, we all know who the criminals are, whether or not they came to trial in the courts and the way the courts is rigged just now against Assange, for example. But also, we have to realise that we cannot fight on their terms, because what happens within the four walls of the Old Bailey or indeed of the High Court is that there is this beautiful, glamorous process put on where you see these old vestiges of, long processes of justice, and actually what's coming out is something completely different, which is completely unjust. And it's also the prolonged torture, whether through isolation or whether through the arbitrariness of outcomes that Julian receives, which are completely at odds with what any system would achieve, as well as the kind of the focus on him as an individual and maligning him and smearing him and breaking him down. And all of this is happening because of one core thing, which is Julian rebalancing power through, whether, like you said, through providing source documentation, or whether through providing a whistleblower with protection in terms of submitting the information, which now all the major newspapers and 40 international human rights organizations also do, whistleblowing organizations also do. It also provides security for documentation, so you know, which is why to this day, WikiLeaks has a 100% accuracy record, and there are no redactions, or at least minimal redactions, so that when you get this information and you can compare it with declassified data, you can see who's told the truth and who's lied, and you can also mine this data to get a better picture of what's really going on. And it is this rebalancing of power that the current states in Britain, America, and in Australia, and in Ecuador, and in Sweden don't want. But this injustice cannot prevail forever. Slavery ended. Yes, we do have forms of modern slavery today, but if we are to progress as a civilization, and I think there comes a point where people are so put upon that they fight back, and I think we're seeing that point in the Assange case right now. So I apologise for interjecting, but they were such fantastic questions that you asked.
No apology necessary. I think that was a fantastic explanation of just the importance of WikiLeaks as well as a source, as a tool. I think we have Nikki back now. Nikki, yes. I just wanted to ask, can we restore respect in the legal system in Britain? Is it possible? Can we get back to that point where we think that our justice system is fair and honest, and we're charging the right people with crimes, the criminals, instead of the people exposing the criminals?
Well, for that to happen, they would have to start charging war criminals, and that's going to be a problem, isn't it? Because they're going to have to go after Blair.
Not hearing you.
Okay, sorry.
I can hear you now. Sorry,
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yep,
can you hear me?
Clear. Yeah, go ahead, Nikki.
Okay, sorry about that. No, I said that for that to happen, they would have to go after real war criminals, one of them being Tony Blair. Can you see that happening? And there's a whole list of other... There's a whole list of other bright boys and girls from Eton and etc. So for people to have confidence in the judicial system, they would have to, first of all, go after some of the players in this case, right, as well. People like Lady Arbuthnot with humongous conflicts of interest and others. So this whole case has been riddled with atrocities against this one man, but people who are overtly in conflict with bigger conflicts of interest. Keir Starmer has played a very ugly role in all of this. So for the British people to have confidence again, there will have to be transparency and accountability. I have had so much trouble through my FOIs getting the documents from the Crown Prosecution Service as to the Swedish extradition case. Now, there are about 7,000 to 9,000 pages. they went, I think they recently gave Stefania Marizzi another 300 pages or something. But out of 9,000 pages, or even if it's the lesser amount, out of 7,000 pages, they will have to give out more. People cannot trust this Crown Prosecution Service when we have enough documents that show that there's been a conspiracy against this particular man. It's very clear that there was a conspiracy between the Crown Prosecution Service and the Swedish Prosecution Authority. Now, initially they said that all those emails, all that information was deleted accidentally, and then afterwards the story changed, and they were saying to me, they were raising exemptions, saying that I can't have that information because of confidentiality, because they might wish to pursue with further proceedings. It's a mess, actually. There have been 2 internal reviews. It's gone to the Information Commissioner's office. They get to have several bites of the cherry. Every time they get it wrong, it goes back to them. They get to rewrite the internal review, add exemptions, and it's a dog's breakfast. It really is. I've never seen anything like it. It's this massive dog's breakfast. And so, I don't know. I mean, I'm not even living in the UK. I have nothing really to do with the UK. I'm amazed. I'm amazed that a country that has such sophisticated weapons, they can make a nuclear bomb and go around the world, colonize, neo-colonize, etc. And yet they can't get one simple FOI done properly without getting the wrong exemptions every single time. I don't think there's been any transparency or any accountability. The only thing I see for the last 3 years, at least, because I've been, pretty much heavily involved in the last 3 years, is torture. Yes, the torture is also physical. This man has a lung condition. He's been placed at risk with COVID cases as soon as the COVID thing happened. He's been kept in solitary confinement. He's been placed at risk repeatedly, including his material body has been placed, and his material physical body has got problems because of this torture. So it's not just psychological something. Of course, psychological torture is terrible. Well, we've got a combination of the two. We've got the psychological and the physical torture. And we've got a scene where we see judges, prosecutors, and other institutions blatantly torturing this man. When it comes to torture, there's an absolute prohibition on torture within the UK Human Rights Act, so the domestic legislation and international law. And when it comes to torture, judges and prosecutors have a responsibility to ensure that these standards are adhered to within the framework of their own legal systems. So, and even if a country has not ratified a particular treaty prohibiting torture, the country is in any event bound on the basis of general international law, because the prohibition of torture is so fundamental. You cannot apply torture even in times of war or emergency. It's absolutely at all times prohibited. And furthermore, under the UK Criminal Justice Act 1988, there is a specific section, section 134 on torture, which means that if one day these judges and prosecutors and other officials ever have to account for what they did, they are up for imprisonment for life if they ever face a court, a real court. Because so far, I'm sorry to say, I haven't seen a real court, even at the High Court level. I have not seen the functioning of a real court as it's meant to be under international law. Article of the European Convention of Human Rights, for example, says that it has to be independent and impartial, open proceedings. We haven't even had open proceedings. So I could go on for... I'm sorry, I'm probably taking up too much time here.
That's a bold and clear indictment of the British legal system and this entire case. Richard, I just wanted to ask you, this is a story about the future of journalism, but also involves legal systems, international relations. It's a huge story. But what are your hopes for Julian Assange as a person and as the case? What do you hope to see resolved out of this in the future?
Well, for him personally, he needs to get out of prison today, right? His health is in danger. His family needs him. He needs his family. There's no reason why he is in prison at all. He's an innocent man. So for him personally, he needs to get out. And then I just hope that the way WikiLeaks conducts journalism can be continued, because it's very important. We need journalists, we need whistleblowers, and we need publishers who are courageous enough to publish these state secrets. And so I hope this can, when all this is over, this can be continued. But for him personally, I mean, this is the most important thing. His life is in danger, and his life needs to be saved.
Absolutely important to remember that. Deeper, there's so many levels to this case, and so many points where you would think that this injustice would be stopped, or someone would say we're grossly overstepping here, over the course of years and years and years. Do you think that all of this adds up to such a big story that it's hard for people to digest or get to grips with?
I think you're very right. I think Gareth Peirce once told me that it really feels like 10 or 11 cases put together because of the different angles. And you can see, even I remember Juan Passarelli, the filmmaker, saying that this is the ideal film case, right? Because it's got murder, it's got death plots, it's got torture, it's got high spying, and all the different angles to it, which makes it a very complicated case for ordinary people to understand and to relate to. But the one thing that we can all relate to is the fact that nobody likes a bully, and that's what the US is being. The US and the UK, as its little, helper in chief, are both stamping down on an individual. And Julian is a visionary, he's a pioneer, he is brilliant. What he did with WikiLeaks, in terms of using different levels of media, not just the international big media like the New York Times and the Guardian and the Washington Post, but also small media organizations and specialist experts to vet data, but also to understand how that data applies in local settings, whether it was using Al-Akbar or whether it was using people like John Sloboda and Andy Worthington, for example, in terms of Guantanamo, where he's pieced together who the people were at Guantanamo, these faceless, nameless people who were not supposed to be existing. And now we know what's really going on. So Julian is this fantastic visionary, and you asked Richard what he would like to see. I would like to see, as an academic, I would like to see Julian coming out and being a famous professor somewhere, explaining to people and helping the world solve some of the real problems that we face, because we live in an unfair and an unjust and an unsustainable world. And whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left, you can see the current system isn't working. It's not working for anybody except a small handful of people, and it's not even going to work for them, because the climate catastrophe as it is going to affect so many people in so many different ways. And we've seen this with COVID. You can't just protect your own little group. What happens elsewhere affects you. And the other thing we see is, when we look at, say, women's rights, right? A lot of this case and a lot of what's happening in Afghanistan right now, people are talking about women's rights, but we've begun to realize that women's rights are not furthered by droning their children and killing their families. So all this, I think, is going to change, and I think we're going to get to a point where we're going to see a real transformation of the system, and that's because lots of ordinary good people are going to come together. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, or indeed comes close.
Fantastic, absolutely. And just to go back to you quickly, Richard, on that note, the United States and Britain sanction other countries, bomb other countries. They say they're doing it for international law, for justice, for women's rights, whatever reasons they throw out. They persecute so many countries. Do you think that, on the contrary, it's Britain and the US that are the rogue states? The US, for example, refuses to go to the International Human Rights Court, refuses to be bound by it. It's actually got a plan to invade if ever an American is tried at the court. Would you say that Britain and the US are pariahs, essentially?
Well, they certainly have no right to lecture the world on free speech or on democracy or on the rule of law. And in the Assange case, they clearly abuse all of these things. And to the revelations of the WikiLeaks revelations, we also see that the US, they start wars based on lies. The UK is knowingly joining the US in these wars. So, this has nothing to do with justice or with human rights. It's just a constant violation of human rights.
Thank you, Richard. We have some questions from viewers here. Nikki, perhaps could you explain to us why Assange sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy and why that refuge was then subsequently withdrawn?
Okay. Initially, he sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy. His application is based on his fear of being persecuted by the US. So he was quite sure that if he went back on Swedish soil, he would be extradited to the US because of a fast track. I'll call it a fast track procedure. It's probably not the correct way to say it in terms of legal terms. So he was right. He was right. That was the plan. The plan was to get him over there and to take him over to the US. There was no reason for the Swedish prosecution to not interview him over video or to go to the UK to interview him. So I won't go into all of the details, but of the background. But basically, he sought refuge and asylum, and he got asylum on the basis that he would be at risk of extradited to the USA. And even though the mainstream media said he was paranoid and they ridiculed him and smeared him for years, saying that that was never going to be the case, as it stands, he was proven right. So that's why. And then eventually what happened was asylum was given to him at the time that Rafael Correa was in charge. Unfortunately, after Correa, it was Lenin Moreno who took charge, who was, the next president. And Lenin Moreno was one of the, was one of the US lackeys. He sold out his country and Julian. And so what happened then was that they illegally stripped him of asylum, illegally stripped him of his nationality, and threw him to the dogs. What happened was that they were very crucial. Ecuador was crucial in this extraordinary rendition. Julian was kidnapped from the embassy. There was nothing legal about what happened there. The fact that the skipping bail allegation, when you have asylum, that is a reasonable, legitimate excuse for not turning up to whatever bail terms you have upon you. So there wasn't even any bail skipping, okay? Because there are rules under asylum that protect you from this kind of thing. The fact that he was an asylee protected him really. In reality, if anything else had worked properly in the UK, he should never have been taken into custody when he was kidnapped. He should never have been kidnapped from the embassy, and he should never have been taken into custody. And that joke of a trial that lasted 15 minutes on the same day, where he was insulted and called a narcissist, etc. I mean, that was not a trial. There was never anything that you could call a trial along this process.
And he had a good reason to believe that he was at risk or in danger of being extradited to the US by Sweden. I believe 2 Egyptian nationals were rendered by Sweden. So, and the charges were only brought against him by Sweden after he released or WikiLeaks released the information on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Well, if you see thankfully we had a brilliant journalist, Stefania Marizzi, who at the time, and I think to this day is the only journalist who did FOI applications and got sufficient information to show that there was a conspiracy between the Crown Prosecution Service and the Swedish Prosecution Authority. Now, I did an FOI in 2020, June or July, I think, and the Swedish Prosecution Authority granted me access to 5,127 pages from their file, and the Crown Prosecution Service still refuses to give me the documents I have asked for. However, initially when Stefania got, I think, over 300 pages, I can't remember the amount, but the initial pages she got brought light to the elephant in the room, that there was clearly a conspiracy between these two authorities to get their man. So we've got enough emails where one of the lawyers at the Crown Prosecution Service says, don't get cold feet, this is not like any other case, don't think this is like any other case. When the Swedes wanted to come to the UK to interview Julian, they said, no, he has to go, he has to be taken there. So basically they played a huge role in directing this extradition that was meant to be something that was requested by another state. But it looks like the people that were directing this Swedish extradition were the UK people. It was the UK Prosecution Service. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nikki. And we have a few more questions from the audience here. Richard, what do you think about the claim that the US has said they won't place Assange in special measures if he is extradited to the US? Do you think they would live up to this?
Well, that's not really an assurance. They have said, like, okay, we will not put them in a maximum security facility, and but this is unreliable because they also said that if Assange does something that they don't like, they reserve the right to put him in a maximum security facility and subject him to special administrative measures, the SAMs, which would mean that he would be in solitary confinement. And this is just a violation of the ban on torture. So then they still don't follow the rules. So this is not really reliable and not really a good assurance by the US.
Thank you, Richard.
Plus,
deeper,
just say
very little work done by non-governmental organisations and other associations on Assange's case. What do you make of this and the reasons for it?
Well, I think a number of people around the world have bought into the false narrative about Assange, which was used to smear and distort what was really going on. And as Niels Melzer said, this is like the elephant in the room holding the torch in its trunk and pointing it to everybody else. So the US and the UK hold this torch, so you cannot see the crimes that they are committing and continue to commit to this day in Iraq and Afghanistan, and in Yemen, in Syria and elsewhere. You talked about the two Egyptian nationals, and the Swedish case was really important in this whole process, because one of the things about the Swedish case is, while it was held in preliminary investigation stage for just under 7 years, what that did was it prevented Assange from being able to request exculpatory evidence. By this we mean evidence which would clear his name. So Sweden would have had, as part of their investigation, lots of information which showed that Assange could not have possibly been prosecuted in this way, and that many things were rigged against him. And they also did things like, for example, making it very difficult for Julian, who offered several times to be interviewed either remotely or within the embassy, for the prosecutor to come over, which Marianne Nee, the Swedish prosecutor, could have done, but didn't do. And the reason they did this is because they wanted to do to Assange what they had done to those two Egyptian nationals that you spoke about, which is once those two Egyptian nationals were there as refugees in Sweden, they were then, with US involvement, reindicted to Egypt and tortured. When they were taken out of Sweden, they were not even given the basic right of consulting with lawyers. So this happened overnight through in a very short period of time through a prosecutorial kind of process. And this meant that judicial processes would not have been available to Julian. And what the US wants to do is circumvent any judicial process, get Julian to the US, and then entomb him in what Nikki described, which is in this concrete bunker where neither he nor his lawyers are allowed to communicate with the public. And you can realize the value of US assurances, for example, right now when they say, oh, we will not put him under, we may not put him under special administrative measures, but depending on the information that comes to light, we may choose to do so. The reason they're doing this is because they did similar things with people like Abu Hamza before, where they gave assurances, diplomatic assurances, as they say, similarly like they gave with the Egyptian nationals, where initially you give a diplomatic assurance saying nothing will be done and these people will be safe, and actually once they get there, you then make life really miserable for them. And the misery you can see in the way Chelsea Manning was treated. She was put in a concrete box, even deprived of her basic clothes. She was allowed to exercise between 2 and 3 a.m. every morning. She was not allowed association time. This drives people completely, this affects mental health tremendously. And it's not mental health being affected because of, Assange has a history of problems with mental health, but it is because states are ganging up to stamp on his head, which is what Britain and America and Australia have done. I think there's also a question of, why this has been done. This has also been done in relation to things like the IMF loan, which was given to Ecuador to allow the Met to go into the embassy. And if Britain cared about the rights of women, which is what they said, we are doing this because we care about the rights of women, that's why we're surveilling Julian, they would not collaborate with the US to spy on the embassy, but also on protesters outside, and spend 20 million or more of the budget of the Metropolitan Police when they don't have enough money to pay for coppers on the beat. What they're trying to do is misuse state funds. Britain is complicit in this. Alan Duncan, Sajid Javid, and also the Mayor of London are all complicit in this. Keir Starmer is at the heart of this. He is the criminal in the room because he was at the head of the Crown Prosecution Service when it allowed for this irregular, inappropriate process to take place, where Britain was putting pressure on the Swedish Crown Prosecution Service not to close this case, to keep it in limbo. And that is against all principles of natural justice. And then you come to the stage where now they pretend as though Keir Starmer should be respected as leader of the Labour Party. How can anybody be at the front of the Labour movement by undermining the rights of ordinary people and workers, who are the ones who are suffering when wealth is being extracted by large weapons manufacturers? And by destroying working people's lives all over the world when Britain is being complicit in this. This is wrong. And we have to stand up against this.
It's very powerfully put, Deepa. You mentioned the UK has spent, it's an estimated £20 million on persecuting Assange because the actual figure is classified. The Metropolitan Police Chief said that the public aren't largely supportive of the amount spent policing Assange, policing the embassy and detaining him. And you think it's not in the interest of the British public to spend more money on this? Absolutely not. And right now, please remember that it's taxpayer money that is paying for the CPS to act on behalf of the United States to continue to torture Julian Assange, both in Belmarsh and through this horrendous process where if you win your case against extradition, you would expect to be free. 7 months after Julian has won his case against extradition, he is still in Belmarsh maximum security prison, being treated like a high-class criminal, where murderers, people who are serving time for very serious offences. Can you imagine how hard it is for him as a victim of torture to be stuck in that prison
to have his friend Craig Murray now sitting in Edinburgh's Saughton prison, where the Scottish courts have gone after Craig Murray in the most vicious way on the flimsy pretext of jigsaw identification. All these are symbolic of establishment people trying to hide their own crimes at the expense of journalists. And journalists around the world need to unite. You asked, what are all these organizations doing? They need to speak louder. It can't just be on Twitter. It needs to be them being on the ground. And like Ibari has done, like other organizations have done, and now even Amnesty and others have all come out, please speak louder. Make the case for Assange. And call Britain and America rogue states, which is what they are when they're ignoring international law. And that's what I would say.
Very well.
They're also ignoring domestic law. They're ignoring their own law as well.
Nikki, why do you think we've seen Assange being prosecuted under Obama's tenure, Trump's, and now Biden's? Why do you think this is such a long, ongoing case for them?
Well, because they have to make it look like it's legal, and they're having lots of problems with that. They do need our consent. They do. If they make it clear that this is part of a, if they make it clear what's really going on, they would have larger parts of society kicking back. So they have to, make it look good for the public. They have to scare some other people as well, just in case others get idea into their own heads about whether they're going to kick back at the mafia boss and the big shots in the mafia. These are mafia tactics. I mean, all you need to do is look at some of those old movies, The Godfather. So they need to make it look like there's a relationship with some kind of rule of law. They've been unsuccessful, as far as I'm concerned. Really what they should be doing now is, if they want to save face, what they should be doing now is that there is a way to get rid of this quite quickly, because the Secretary of State for Justice, Lord Buckland, has the duty imposed on his office of ensuring that the facilities of prison and the resources of prison are in accordance with Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights. Now, he hasn't shown that. He hasn't been able to show that the torture has stopped in Belmarsh. In that case, he's got the duty to free him. He has to release him. As a minister, the Court of Appeal in another case said that it is the Secretary of State, as a Minister of the Executive, who bears the duty of ensuring that prisoners are provided with the same level of access to medical treatment as available to the general public. If detention cannot occur without Article 3 being breached, then the Secretary of State should exercise his duties laid down in a particular case. I can cite it if you want. In a case from 2005, by releasing the prisoner, if release is the only way that the breach of Article 3 can be remedied. It is clear that the only way to remedy the breach of Article 3 that has been ongoing for years, particularly in Belmarsh prison, is by releasing him. There is absolutely no legal or moral excuse to keep retaining this man in prison. None, absolutely none. So they could get rid of this the way they did with Pinochet, who, by the way, killed at least 40,000 people. Pinochet lived in deluxe apartments until his case was finally decided. And they just ripped it up, really. The executive ripped it up and said, go away, it's finished. So if they can do that with their mates who are, either war criminals or have committed crimes against humanity or other atrocities, they can surely do it for somebody who has saved humanity, has saved lives, because by impeding wars, he has saved lives. But when people say that Julian put lives at risk, no, he didn't. He impeded the plans of certain war criminals who we know are war criminals, and we know they are liars. They have never stopped. They've lied into war. They've killed hundreds of thousands of people, displaced millions. they did this with lies. So if they're going to lie to the UN and other institutions, and they've lied before other courts, they've lied before the a European Court of Human Rights, they've lied before other courts and international institutions, why wouldn't they lie about this one person? They've lied to kill millions. Why wouldn't they lie to kill one more person? What is one more person to them? Nothing. And when they talk about lives being destroyed, they never count brown or black lives or non-American lives. It's always US soldiers, or UK soldiers. It's those lives that matter. No other lives in the countries where they go to take democracy. Those lives don't matter. So I don't think we can believe anything that the officials of the US or the UK or Australia have to say to anybody. It's that old adage of fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. No, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. They keep lying to us, they keep fooling us, and we keep falling for it. What's wrong with us? Forget them. What is wrong with us? That's my question.
So we have to be big enough criminals to be able to enjoy the justice system, essentially. We're joined now by Taylor Hudak, an independent American journalist. She focuses on First Amendment issues, human rights abuses, and the corruption of intelligence agencies. It's a wonder she's able to join us if she focuses on those issues. Good evening, Taylor. I'm afraid we're not getting any audio from Taylor at the moment. Hopefully we can resolve that and come back to you in just a moment. Richard, you deal with, as a photojournalist, perspective, image. How do you think Assange has been presented in the media? Has the media helped his case? Has he come across well in the media, or have they hurt his case?
The media have hurt his case a lot, right? It's just a 10-year period of character assassination by the mainstream media to just help shape the public opinion about him. It's just and in the end, everybody lost interest, and nobody cares anymore. Or they think like, oh, this is this guy who hacked or into things. But it's just, I think, deliberately character assassination by the media. Now, there are also other journalists, like the more independent media, who could see the real what was happening in this case, and actually provided the public with real and truthful information. But of course, when the majority of the public is dependent on the mainstream media, that's a very powerful thing to just shape the public opinion about someone, and that's what happened. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a very powerful tool. Hopefully, we have Taylor with us now with audio. Good evening, Taylor. I think we have unfortunately lost the link with the USA. Potentially, that's the powers that be not wanting us to find out what she has to say. Deepa, WikiLeaks developed a new model for journalistic activity. Excuse me, sorry. Daniel Hale spent 45, has just been sentenced to 45 months in prison for revealing the fact that 90% of people hit in US drone strikes were innocent bystanders. He was charged under the same Espionage Act that the US is indicting Assange for. Does the US public have a right to know what its military is up to, what their tax money is being spent on, or are they right in saying that, well, these operations are too dangerous for people to know? Deepa?
Well, firstly, coming back to Daniel Hale's revelations, and indeed the revelations of Assange, when you're tried under the Espionage Act is the one act in the US which does not have a public interest defense. So if you look at Daniel Hale's letter, which he published and provided to the judge at his judgment, and also which information that was provided beforehand, what is very clear is that it is not just a case of evil, utter evil and atrocity that the US and Britain are destroying these countries and, you know, doing very, very illegal things and going into illegal wars, and that they are also, the number of civilians they are killing is disproportionate to the number of so-called terrorists. And I say so-called terrorists because even today in Guantanamo, there sits a man who was taken on the assumption that he was a very serious terrorist. He was indicted to Guantanamo. The terrorist with the same name was then also indicted to Guantanamo and released. And yet, this man continues to be in Guantanamo. So a lot of the US taxpayer money is going on oppressing people from very, very tricky backgrounds where, you know, they're pushed into a war, a number of the crises that we see globally, whether they are refugee crises, etc., and the pressures that are put on domestic systems. And we say we don't want refugees coming from overseas. Well, if you go and destroy their countries, if you go and you know, torture, murder, kill them elsewhere, or if you go and explode bombs there so they can no longer grow crops, where will they go? They will try and flee overseas. And that's why we have the pressure on the kinds of systems we have here, because we're spending the money on wars and bombs, and we're not spending it on the NHS. We're not spending it in the US on basic social security, which is why so many people in the US, in a rich country, are going hungry, are going without health care. They are not able to do Medicare for all because the money is being, you know, $2.5 trillion in Afghanistan. This idea of perpetual forever war, where money is being drained out of what the taxpayer money is being taken from taxpayers and handed in a very illegitimate way to weapons manufacturers, who then pay it back through tax havens to the rich and the powerful in our countries. So it's a redistribution of wealth, not from the rich to the poor, but from the poor to the rich. And that's what is wrong about cases like this. You know, the wars that we are committing are actually killing us here. And of course, there is no justification to torture and imprison and murder a journalist in Belmarsh prison. There is no public interest justification to spend 20 million of London's mayoral budget on surveilling the Ecuadorian embassy. If you did, then the rate of conviction of, you know, with rape would be more than 3%. But that's not where they're putting the money. They're putting the money on the crimes they want, on the so-called crimes they say they want to prosecute, which are not crimes at all, which are essentially smoke screens to hide their own criminality. So I think one of the sad things is when we saw the 2017 general election in the UK and the neutralisation of Corbyn through the fake anti-Semitism smears, we can see very clearly how the mainstream media can destroy a popular movement which came within 2,000 votes of succeeding. And if you look at any homeless person on the streets today, you can be sure that the people who voted Tory in that general election, because they were misled by the likes of Keir Starmer since, and also by Boris and his mates before that, are the ones who are suffering when public services are taken away, when services in terms of the healthcare, when the NHS is being privatised. So no, there is no justification in the eyes of the public.
Thank you, Deepa. I believe we have Taylor on the line now. Apologies for the technical issues we had, Taylor. It's fantastic that you can join us. And if you can just briefly tell us, you know, as a journalist that focuses on corruption in the intelligence agencies and human rights abuses in America, the Assange case must have significant impact for you. Can you just tell us a bit about being a journalist and what this case means to you? I'm afraid we're still not getting any audio from Taylor. I'm so sorry, everyone. It would have been fantastic to hear that response from you, but we'll have to call it there, I think. So just to sum up, would you like to make any final statements about you know, your involvement in the case, what you want to see happen, what you'd like people to do to get involved? Deepa.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Journalists Support Committee for hosting this event, because it is really important that all journalists use all avenues they can, whether it is in writing articles, whether it is in presenting photojournalism like Richard does, whether it is in using video, whether it is, you know, quite basic things that you can do at home, talking to your neighbors, talking to your friends, talking to your family, educating people about what the case is, because it is complex. If you're listening here, please try and take some of the information and pass it within your community. Please contact the Committee to Defend Julian Assange for stickers and banners, etc. to provide. Please join us at the in central London and in Belmarsh for all the vigils and protests. If you can, come down to Belmarsh. There's a protest every Saturday. But importantly, on the 27th and 28th of October, please make your voice heard with the British government and outside the High Court, so that people, the courts have to know, the government has to know that people are watching, and we will not allow this injustice to continue.
Thank you, Deepa. And Nikki, you've painted a rather grim picture of the reality of the situation, but you keep struggling for Assange. You keep telling people about what's going on and trying to reveal the truth.
Yes, because of course we want Assange to survive this and to go free, but this isn't just about one man and his great contribution to humanity and history. Because no matter what they do to him, he has put his stamp on history, and they can't efface that. They'll never be able to get rid of that, no matter how much they try. And we've seen historically that, people, let's just take one example, Galileo, he said the earth turned and it turned. At some stage, this truth that has been spoken by Julian, the archives put together by Julian, which are as precious as, or maybe I'm overstating it, but they are a modern Alexandrian library. So these are historical records, vast historical records of what has happened in the 20th century and the 21st. So I think it's very important for people to understand that Julian and WikiLeaks is part of our cultural heritage. This is our story as well. And they're trying to kill our story and our lives, and we shouldn't let them. So for me, the struggle, if they manage to kill him, because it's very clear that's what they're trying to do, if they manage to kill him, this could boomerang very badly on them, and it could get worse, actually. They will turn him into a martyr, and perhaps the reaction from the public may be very surprising for the people who are planning this murder. Even though it's a very slow murder, it is a very clear murder. And I think that they do have a sortie, they've got an exit, which is the Pinochet exit. They need to just tear up the whole thing. I don't think we should, I agree with Deepa that people should massively turn up outside the court, but I don't think we should wait until then. There could be an adjournment and who knows what. I think we should be very active. On social media as well, it's important, but I think we should be very active and present physically as much as we can on the streets, outside Belmarsh prison especially. I think there should be a very strong and regular presence outside Belmarsh prison every Saturday. People should join the Julian Assange Defense Committee that has been fighting for Julian for a decade now. They should not do that job on their own. There's only about 10 to 15 of them. Really, we need to come to this battle because it's our battle. But apart from the fact that it's our battle and in our interest, we do need to think of our lives as having more value than just the economical. It's about having consciousness, not just money. So, of course, the material is important. We want to have easier lives and we will fight for that. But we will not be able to fight any other battle if we don't have freedom of expression and if we don't have information about our real world. And what the gift that was given to us by Julian was the truth about our real material conditions. He gave us the possibility to understand our real world and the players in it and who pulls the strings and what's really going on. You cannot make informed decisions. You cannot fight back unless you know who the enemy is and what they're up to. So he is our strongest weapon. He is our hero. He is on the side of the common man and woman and child. And if we don't defend him, we will meet the fate that we will meet, and it's not pleasant. So I don't have any faith in any institution, NGO, etc. I don't care. I don't care what they're doing. My faith is in the common man, woman, and those who have consciousness, of what's right and wrong, and that justice, without justice, we will be living in a barbaric world. Do we really want that? Do we want it for our children? Yeah, I think it's a very important issue which affects all of our lives, and I think it's important to stand up for all of that.
Fantastic. And any final statements from you, Richard?
This is such a political case. Public pressure is really important. So if you care about the Assange case and care about truth and justice and democracy, just like what Julian's father always says, go to the barricades, inform people, educate people of what's going on, and just use your voice.
Thank you, Richard. And I think we can go to Taylor Hudak now. Taylor, are you with us?
Hi, yes. Can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Taylor.
Oh, excellent.
So glad to get through
first
to
of
you.
all, thank you for having me at this event, and I apologize for the many technical problems I've had here, but it's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. And I just wanted to ask you, in the time we have left, as a journalist, you focus on many dangerous topics, I would say. If you're investigating corruption in intelligence agencies, focusing on human rights abuses in America, I mean, you must have your work cut out for you. But the Assange case, what impact does this have on you? How does it make you feel, and how do you think it would impact your career?
Well, this case is extremely important for the future of the First Amendment and press freedoms. That has been made abundantly clear tonight. But one thing that I do want to point out is that covering this last hearing, the preliminary appeal hearing, I was really shocked and quite concerned to see that Julian Assange was unrecognizable during this hearing. In fact, I had to really look at him because I was on who the camera was on, and then I realized that it was him. I'm very concerned about his treatment in Belmarsh prison, and I'm very concerned about his health in particular. We have heard testimony during the extradition hearings that his mental health is not well, and that he is in need of serious help and psychiatric care as well because of the prolonged torture that he has suffered. And so this case, of course, is not only a press freedom case, but there's also a human rights element to this case. And as far as the intelligence community involvement in the persecution of Julian Assange, it's important to remember that the United States government, the intelligence agencies and the prosecutors had a very unfair advantage when prosecuting this case. They were able to not only be granted significantly more time with preparing this case, as opposed to Julian Assange's defense team. He wasn't able to see his team for many, many months. And so now we are at this appeal hearing, which just seems completely ridiculous, given the point that I don't know how the United States government can make their case any more clear. And it's true that the facts lie on the side of the defense. And so it is really a shame to see this case continue on. And for everybody watching, I would just reassure them to keep the fire going, keep the pressure on, and keep fighting, because this is not over until he is free and home with his family.
Fantastic. Thank you, Taylor. And as a journalist, WikiLeaks is being characterised as criminality, as espionage. What do you make of that attempt to criminalise their activity? And is it journalism? Is it espionage?
Well, it's absolutely journalism. It's exceptional journalism. In fact, this is the journalism that won Julian Assange numerous awards, and here he is sitting in Belmarsh prison. It's important to remember that in the West, in the UK, there is a political prisoner and that somebody is being imprisoned for award-winning journalism. This is absolutely outrageous. And as far as WikiLeaks' journalistic work, it's important to remember that WikiLeaks really changed the media sphere. And we view news gathering and media differently now that WikiLeaks exists and has for the past nearly 20 years almost, or 15 years rather. And so the funding model also is what allows WikiLeaks to produce this good journalism. Here we have the corporate mainstream media who really has to adhere to the interests of their funders. And that is why the mainstream media in the United States and throughout the world is just quite corrupt and unable to report on issues that are in the public interest. And that is exactly what Julian Assange did. He did public interest journalism. And one thing that's unique, again, about WikiLeaks is the fact that it is an organization that lies outside the boundaries of any social, political, or governmental establishment. It's really an organization for the people. And so this is absolutely journalism. And when having the discussions about this case in particular, we should also reflect on the fact that during the extradition hearings, we heard testimony from numerous experts about publications led to real-world positive change.
Fantastic. And we've seen the jailing of Daniel Hale recently. Chelsea Manning has famously spent a lot of time in solitary confinement, essentially being in torturous conditions. What do you think about the criminalising of sources like this? Does that make your job as a journalist harder?
Well, yes, it seeks to criminalize journalism. This is basic and very general news gathering and journalistic activity that is being put on trial here. So this is extremely serious, and it does also criminalize basically the obtainment of such information, not just the publishing of this information. So again, Julian Assange is not being tried as a whistleblower, but as a journalist. So this is a very serious case made clear this evening. But one thing that I would like to point out as well is the fact that there has been a number of legal irregularities in this case, yet it still continues on. I mean, the United States, the prosecution's key witness has now admitted to lying to the authorities during the investigation. And the case is still proceeding. The United States government intelligence agencies also spied on Julian Assange, had access to his communications with his attorneys and medical professionals, yet the case continues. There were numerous chances for this case to be thrown out of court, yet it continues on, which does show, in fact, that the U.S. is quite desperate. The fact that they had to, find this particular witness to make their case shows the desperation on behalf of the U.S. government and the intelligence agencies. And again, for everybody that's watching right now, I would just encourage them to remember that the facts are on our side. Get involved, keeping for this case, because it not only impacts journalists, but it impacts the public, because this is an assault on the public's right to know. And whatever cause means so much to you, if that's animal rights, if that is gay rights, whatever that may be, the outcome of this case will impact your ability to fight for your cause and your passion.
What do you make of the role of the media in Assange's case? Do you feel that they've been largely supportive, your fellow journalists in mainstream media on TV and print, or do you feel that they've hindered support for Assange?
Well, certainly, I wouldn't say that they have been supportive, but I think it's very important to acknowledge the fact that over the past 2 years since Assange's arrest in 2019, we have seen more and more people in the mainstream media show their support for Assange, and in particular, really condemn the U.S. government's decision to charge Julian Assange with espionage for journalistic activity. We saw many people in the mainstream media make note of this, and it was quite surprising, but also a very good thing. So while, yes, we would like the media, mainstream media, to cover this case more fairly, it's important to also acknowledge the fact that it is not some fringe group of activists or journalists who are supporting Assange and advocating for his freedom. In fact, every single major human rights and civil liberties organization throughout the world is advocating for his release and is calling upon the Biden administration to drop this case. So this is becoming a very unpopular decision by the United States government through the perspective of other world leaders as well. And I think it was Gabriel Shipton who said during an event that each time the United States government officials say that the U.S. values the First Amendment and that it values free press, the response from other world leaders is, well, what about Julian Assange? The United States is prosecuting an award-winning journalist. So it's becoming increasingly more unacceptable for the United States to continue prosecuting this case.
What do you think about the future of journalism in America if Assange is successfully extradited to America and prosecuted for this? What do you think about the media's effectiveness of being able to report on things of great public interest and which should be public knowledge, such as the ongoings in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, killings of civilians, these kind of things? What do you see for the future of American journalism?
Of this case will deem such reporting as criminal, so it will result in possible arrest. And I think it's important to remember that while the majority of the public still watches mainstream media, it's really dying. I mean, the views and the ratings are decreasing quite significantly over the past 10 years. And I believe that the future is new media, and that is what you may call independent or alternative media. More and more people, especially young people in particular, are tuning into new media who I would say have done a rather good job covering Julian Assange's case. There were about a handful of journalists who were really covering this case, in particular the extradition hearings. And I believe that the majority of those people were independent journalists or working for alternative outlets. So the future is in new media. And I would just encourage everybody to continue to uplift those who are reporting on this case, because there are several people doing a really wonderful job. And so while the mainstream media hasn't been doing such as good of a job covering this case, I think it's important not so much to focus on that, but to focus on those who are bringing awareness to this case and continue to talk to others who may have an interest in this and maybe can help out.
Assange and his sources have been charged under the Espionage Act 1917. Now, there's an ongoing debate for a long time in America about the law in relation to the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. What do you think about this law, and is it being used to pursue people for political reasons rather than criminal reasons? Well,
again, it's unprecedented, but one thing that came out during the extradition hearings that was made clear by one of the witnesses was the fact that the U.S. Espionage Act was always intended for prosecutorial discretion. It was up to prosecutors and others in the legal field to not prosecute innocent citizens, but that is precisely what is happening here, and it's really unprecedented. And I worry that this could set a trend in the future where this becomes a normal thing, and unfortunately something that the majority of the public will accept. It's not acceptable, and we need to keep the pressure on.
There's a lot of NGOs around journalism, freedom of speech, freedom of press, these kind of things, but they all seem to be largely quiet on the issue of Assange. Why do you think that is?
You know, I would actually say that NGOs and human rights organizations are speaking out in support of Assange. Rebecca Vincent comes to mind in particular with RSF, Reporters Without Borders, monitoring this case. And in fact, Reporters Without Borders had a very difficult time accessing the court proceedings back in September, about a year ago now, during the second round of the extradition hearings. They were prevented access to the courtroom. And many journalists also had difficulties covering the case because of the technical difficulties that came with the remote access. But in addition to Reporters Without Borders, there are many other organizations, Amnesty International, and others who are calling upon the Biden administration to drop the case. And I will do the same. This administration should drop this case while we can't rely on elected leaders to solve our problems, I fully acknowledge that. It's still important to keep the pressure on, as I said earlier.
Fantastic. What do you think people can do more in the US to support Assange, whether they're journalists or activists or just concerned citizens?
You can call your representatives. That's one avenue you can pursue. You can also call the White House, write letters. You can attend protests. There are many protests that you can become involved in. Them in the bigger cities, but there are events that you can attend. And then also too, if you are an activist, you can attend other related protests and also maybe wear a t-shirt or have something on the back of your sign that mentions Julian Assange and mentions press freedoms and the importance of maintaining the First Amendment. And then also too, just getting the word out, talking with your friends and family members about this case and spreading the knowledge.
Fantastic. And just any last comments from you, Deepa?
I was just going to say, this case is not like any other case. As Taylor's rightly said, we have Siggy Torderson, who is the Icelandic witness, who's a convicted paedophile being used by the FBI to persecute Assange. We have UC Global, which was run out of Sheldon Adelson's casino in Las Vegas, spying on Julian on behalf of the CIA and, spying on privileged conversations. The breach of attorney-client privilege alone should have had this case thrown out of court. So Taylor's absolutely right. Please make sure. I'm wearing a little badge today which says Free Assange. If you're going out, if you're carrying a bag, if you're having a green screen behind you which has a logo, try and keep that logo of Assange, try and keep him in the front of memory, use your social media avatar and the background on it to say to people, so that people remember, because it's very easy to forget somebody who's confined in the depths of Belmarsh, and you can see that right now where, here, Julian's case is showing to us how badly people are treated during extradition, how badly people are being treated in Belmarsh, how if you speak up against the state, like Craig Murray, who is a journalist, you will be put into Sorton prison even in Scotland. So it's showing us really what's going on in our state, and it's time for us to speak up. So that's what I'd like to see. Dan.
Thank you, Deepa. Any last comments from you, Richard, on those last contributions?
No, just thank you for organizing this. I think it's a very useful thing to do. Just what I said, just use your voice and don't be afraid to use it. Educate and inform people, and that's it.
Thanks, Richard. And last word to you, Nikki.
Yes, well, for me, it's not just about journalism, and it's not just about our right to know. This is directly attacking the freedom of expression of all of us around the world. And if this continues, we will not be able to say or do anything at all at some stage. Because if you cannot express yourself, you cannot organize, you cease to exist at some point. You can't exchange your ideas, you can't organize with other people, you can't make changes in this world. And if we don't react now, I think we will live in a very ugly world. So we must, even if our lives are difficult and even if we don't have a lot of spare time, this is too important to put on the back burner. It's too important to say, well, I'll do something later on if it gets really bad. And we already see with all the, under the guise of COVID, they've taken away so many of our civil liberties. This will not stop. They will continue, those in power will continue until they have absolute totalitarian control. And I don't know if any of you think that that's a worthwhile life and in living it in a worthwhile world, but it's something to think about. And I would like people to keep in mind that this is a war against us. This is torture also against us. They're torturing Julian, his family, and the rest of us. And this will not stop or get better. And thank you again also for having me on your platform and to discuss this issue, very important issue, with all of you.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight and taking the time out to explain why this case is so important for a huge variety of reasons. Whether you're a journalist, a lawyer, you're interested in human rights, you're a normal person, this case can and will affect everyone. So thank you to Richard Luhy, photojournalist, for joining us, Dr. Deepa Driver, a trade unionist and university lecturer, Nikki Constantinou, barrister and solicitor, and Taylor Hudak, an American independent journalist, for joining us this evening and spreading so much knowledge about the Assange case. Thank you all. You can find more information about the Journalist Support Committee at journalistsupport.net and support the work that they do in terms of raising awareness of issues of press freedom and journalistic integrity. Thank you all so much and good evening.
Well done.